A millionaire is dying of a heart attack, and what his wife did shocked everyone. You're in the right place. But before you judge her, ask yourself, what would you do if the person you loved most was about to die, and you had one secret that could change everything? This is a true-to-life story about power, betrayal, and the kind of revenge that doesn't just hurt, it destroys. Stay with me until the end, because what you'll see in this story will make you question trust itself. By every measure, Daniel Reed had everything a man could want. At 45, he was a self-made millionaire, a real estate mogul who turned abandoned city blocks into gold. His penthouse towered over downtown Los Angeles, overlooking the skyline like a throne. Every evening, as the sun dipped behind the glass towers, Daniel would pour himself a glass of vintage scotch, lean back in his leather chair, and tell himself he had finally won. Beside him, always poised and radiant, was Sarah Reed, 38, elegant, the kind of woman who made heads turn without trying. Once a struggling interior designer, she had become a symbol of grace, sophistication, and quiet power. To the world, they were the dream couple. Love, money, beauty, and status all in one perfect frame. But what no one knew was that the foundation of that perfect picture was cracking. It was a Thursday evening, the night Daniel's life would change forever. The city was alive with noise, horns, laughter, and music spilling from rooftop bars. Inside their penthouse, dinner was served on a marble table big enough for 12, though it was just the two of them. Sarah had prepared his favorite, truffle pasta, steak, and a bottle of red older than their marriage. But Daniel wasn't smiling. His phone buzzed again and again, work messages always urgent. He barely looked up as Sarah poured his wine. "Do you ever stop working?" she asked softly. Daniel didn't even answer. "The world doesn't stop for anyone, Sarah, not even for love." The silence between them grew heavy. There was something unspoken, weeks of cold distance, quiet arguments, and late nights he couldn't explain. Sarah's eyes stayed fixed on him, her voice low, but sharp. "Then maybe the world will stop for you." He smirked, dismissive, unaware of how true those words would soon become. Moments later, it happened. Daniel stood to fetch another glass when his chest tightened like a vice. The fork clattered to the floor. His breathing became short, panicked. His hand clutched his heart. "Sarah!" he gasped. In seconds, he collapsed onto the marble floor, his face pale, his lips trembling. For a moment, Sarah froze. Her mind raced. The man who had built empires, who had humiliated her behind closed doors, and who thought he was untouchable, was now on the ground, helpless. Her phone was right there. She could call 911, but she didn't. Not yet. She walked over, her heels echoing across the floor, calm, too calm. She knelt beside him, watching the man who had once held all the power struggle for his next breath. "Help me," he whispered, reaching for her hand. Sarah's eyes softened, not with love, but with something darker. "Now you know how it feels," she whispered back. Then she stood up and walked away. It took her 5 minutes to make the call, long enough for Daniel's heartbeat to fade to a faint, desperate pulse. When the ambulance arrived, she played her role perfectly, the panicked wife, shaking, crying, shouting his name. The paramedics rushed him out on a stretcher, his life hanging by a thread. Neighbors peeked from their doors, cameras flashed. By the time Sarah arrived at the hospital, social media was already buzzing. Millionaire real estate king collapses at home. But no one knew what happened before that call, and Sarah wasn't about to tell them. As Daniel lay unconscious in the ICU, Sarah sat in the waiting room, staring blankly at the tiled floor. Around her, the world blurred, the smell of antiseptic, the murmur of nurses, the rhythm of heart monitors. She remembered the first time she met him, 10 years ago, when she was an intern at his firm. He had charm, charisma, and the power to make her feel seen in a city that ignored dreamers. He promised her the world, and for a while, he gave it to her. But success changed him. The more he earned, the more cruel he became. Meetings that turned into affairs, arguments that turned into humiliation. And one night, one unforgivable betrayal that broke her completely. She had discovered something hidden deep in his offshore accounts, a secret fund in another woman's name, a woman she thought was her friend. That was the night Sarah stopped being a wife and started becoming something else. Doctors said Daniel was critical but alive. The next 24 hours were crucial. Sarah stayed by his side, holding his hand, whispering soft prayers for the man she had just let die a little inside. To everyone around her, she was the picture of devotion. But inside, she was planning. She knew Daniel's empire, every asset, every password, every hidden transaction. She had spent months studying his accounts quietly, pretending to design their new beach house while she built a secret of her own. And now, fate had handed her the perfect opportunity. That night, as Daniel lay unconscious, Sarah walked into his private office. The security cameras were disabled. She had made sure of that. She sat at his desk, entered his password, the one she had memorized years ago, and opened his laptop. There it was. Proof of everything, fake contracts, offshore accounts, evidence of corporate fraud, and names that could destroy reputations across the city. She inserted a flash drive, copied everything, and whispered to herself, "This time, Daniel, I'm in control." Outside, the city lights shimmered, the same city Daniel had ruled for years. Inside, Sarah stood by the hospital window, watching the night sky. Her reflection stared back, no longer the obedient wife, but a woman reborn through pain. Tomorrow, the world would wake up to the news that Daniel Reed was dying. But no one, not even Daniel himself, would know what his wife had already done. She had set something in motion that would shock everyone and change everything forever.
The city woke to headlines that buzzed across every screen. Real estate tycoon Daniel Reed hospitalized after massive heart attack. News vans parked outside the hospital. Paparazzi camped on the sidewalks. Business journalists called it a sudden tragedy. Investors called it a market shock. But inside the sterile corridors of St. Helena's Medical Center, Sarah Reed called it something else. A turning point. She played her part flawlessly. Every hour she walked to Daniel's room with flowers, smiled for the nurses, and said all the right things. "He's strong. He'll make it. He always does." The sympathy was endless. Friends, colleagues, even strangers sent messages of concern. Cameras caught her leaving the hospital each night, her sunglasses hiding eyes that never seemed to cry. The public adored her devotion. But behind that mask, something far colder was taking shape. Every evening after the reporters dispersed, Sarah returned home to the penthouse that still smelled faintly of his cologne and power, and locked herself in Daniel's private study. The flash drive she'd filled the night before sat like a loaded weapon beside her. When she opened the first folder, the glow of the screen lit her face in blue. She scrolled through emails, contracts, wire transfers, millions flowing quietly into untraceable accounts. It wasn't just money. It was people. Politicians, developers, charities, all tied to Daniel's empire of deceit. He had built his fortune not just on real estate, but on manipulation, blackmail, and silence. Her heart tightened. How many lives had he ruined while smiling across dinner tables? And then she found it. A folder titled SR. For a moment, she froze. Those were her initials. She clicked it open. Inside, a single file. Prenup update.pdf. Her eyes raced across the document. It was an updated prenuptial agreement, rewritten without her knowledge, filed secretly through his lawyer. It stripped her of almost everything. If Daniel died, she would get nothing. He had planned it all. Even her grief had been calculated. Sarah leaned back, tears gathering in her eyes, not of sadness, but fury. "This isn't over, Daniel. You started a war you thought I wouldn't fight. The next morning, she made a call. Alex, it's me. I need your help. Alex Monroe, an investigative journalist, sharp, relentless, and once deeply in love with her before Daniel had stepped into the picture. They hadn't spoken in years. He hesitated at first. Sarah, you're calling me now? After? Daniel's in a coma, and I have something you'll want to see. There was silence on the line, then a slow exhale. Where? Penthouse. Midnight. No cameras. The city slept as Sarah stood by the massive glass wall of the penthouse. Below, the skyline pulsed with electric life. Inside, the clock ticked toward midnight. When the elevator chimed, Alex stepped in. Older now, his beard unkempt, eyes still burning with curiosity. You look different, he said softly. So do you, she replied. She handed him the flash drive. Everything's on there. Fraud, laundering, names, everything Daniel hid. He turned it in his fingers, uncertain. Why now? Because he thought he could erase me, and because I'm done keeping his secrets. Alex looked at her for a long moment. If I publish this, you know what happens. His company collapses, people lose jobs. You'll be seen as the wife who destroyed an empire. Sarah's lips trembled, but her eyes didn't. Then maybe they'll finally see the truth. Meanwhile, back at St. Helena's, Daniel's condition wavered between life and death. Machines beeped softly in the dim ICU room. His hand twitched, his eyelids flickered. A nurse noticed, small movements, tiny signs of life. He's responding, she whispered to another nurse. He might wake up soon. The news spread quickly, and by morning, Sarah received a call from Daniel's doctor. Mrs. Reed, your husband's stable. There's a chance he'll regain consciousness within days. For a moment, Sarah said nothing. Her plan was in motion. The files were with Alex. The press would explode once the story broke. But if Daniel woke up, he could ruin everything. That night, Sarah stood outside Daniel's hospital room. Through the glass, she saw the man who had once controlled her life, now reduced to wires and machines. The monitors pulsed steadily, proof he was still alive. She thought of every lie, every betrayal, the woman in his secret accounts, the fake smiles, the manipulation. But she also remembered the laughter they once shared, the quiet mornings when he'd bring her coffee, the promises before greed poisoned them both. A tear slipped down her cheek. Why did you make me hate you? She whispered. Her fingers brushed the doorknob just as a nurse entered behind her. Mrs. Reed, he's improving. You should talk to him when he wakes up. Familiar voices help recovery. Sarah forced a smile and said, Of course. But inside, she wasn't sure if she wanted him to wake up at all. At 3 a.m., Alex called. His voice was tense. Sarah, it's out. I sent it to 3 major outlets. By morning, the story will be everywhere. Sarah's pulse raced. What story? Everything. The offshore accounts, the political payoffs, the fraud. You didn't name me, did you? No. But you know how this works. They'll connect the dots soon enough. She closed her eyes. Then it's done. Alex paused. Are you sure you're ready for this? I've been ready for years, she said quietly. Money broke over Los Angeles, and chaos followed. The news spread like wildfire. Real estate empire under investigation for massive corporate fraud. Anonymous source leaks files linking tycoon to corruption scandal. Stocks crashed, business partners vanished. The board issued a statement calling for Daniel's resignation, not knowing he lay unconscious, unable to respond. And Sarah watched it all unfold from the penthouse balcony, the wind whipping through her hair, her phone buzzing endlessly with calls she wouldn't answer. For a brief moment, she felt something she hadn't in years. Freedom. But freedom never comes without a price. That evening, Sarah's phone rang again. This time it was the hospital. Mrs. Reed, your husband's awake. Her blood ran cold. He's asking for you. The world around her blurred. The news, the chaos, the revenge, all of it faded as fear returned. She drove to the hospital through flashing lights and camera crews, her hands trembling on the wheel. When she stepped into the ICU, Daniel's eyes were open, pale, weak, but alive. He looked at her, a faint, broken smile on his lips. "Sarah, you're here," he whispered. For a moment she couldn't breathe. The man she had betrayed, the man who had betrayed her first, was staring straight at her, unaware of what she had done. "Yes," she said softly. "I'm here." His eyes glistened. "There's something I need to tell you." She stepped closer, her voice steady despite the storm inside. "What is it, Daniel?" He reached weakly for her hand. "I know everything." Her heart stopped. "What do you mean?" "I heard the nurses, the reporters, they said, the files, my empire." He swallowed hard. "You leaked it, didn't you?" Silence filled the room. Sarah didn't answer. She didn't need to. The look in her eyes told him the truth. Daniel's expression shifted. Sorrow, then anger, then something like understanding. "You wanted revenge, but you've destroyed yourself too." She turned away, tears burning in her eyes. "No, Daniel. I just made sure the world finally saw you for who you are." The monitor beeped faster, Daniel's pulse spiking. Nurses rushed in as alarms sounded. Sarah backed away, shaken. The doctor shouted, "We're losing him again." And as chaos filled the room, Sarah whispered under her breath, "Maybe this time, it's for real." Outside the hospital, flashbulbs flickered, headlines screamed, and the city buzzed with the scandal she had unleashed. But deep down, Sarah knew this wasn't the end, because the man she thought she had beaten wasn't done with her yet.
Morning light spilled through the ICU blinds, washing the room in soft gold. Daniel Reed lay still, surrounded by the quiet hum of machines, his eyes open at last. He was alive, pale, weak, but alive. No one expected him to make it through the night. Yet here he was, clinging to consciousness as if pulled back by unfinished business. Doctors whispered that it was a miracle. Sarah called it something else, fate refusing to close the chapter. Outside the hospital, the world was on fire. News networks replayed headlines every hour. Reed Industries under investigation. Anonymous source leaks insider files. Speculation swirled. Some blamed Daniel, others pitied him. But when the story shifted from the empire to the marriage behind it, public sympathy fractured. Talk shows debated. Was Sarah Reed a loyal wife or the whistleblower who betrayed her husband? Within days, her name became a storm of hashtags and suspicion. Sarah watched the news from the hospital cafeteria, her coffee untouched. Every word cut deeper. She had destroyed Daniel's empire to free herself, yet somehow she had become the villain in his story. When Daniel was stable enough to speak, he asked for Sarah. She entered his room cautiously. He looked frail but alert, eyes sharp even through exhaustion. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. Two people bound by love, lies, and consequences. Daniel broke the silence first. "I should hate you," he said, voice raspy,
but I can't decide if you ruined me or saved me." Sarah blinked. "Saved you?" He gave a weak laugh. "If the leak hadn't happened, I'd still be chasing more deals, more greed. Maybe this was what I needed, to see what I'd become." Sarah didn't answer. The man she had wanted to destroy was suddenly human. "Tell me the truth," he continued. "Was it you?" Her throat tightened. "Yes." He nodded slowly. "Then we're even." That line, "we're even," lingered in the air like smoke. Neither of them knew what it truly meant. While Daniel recovered, his company spiraled. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. Investors demanded leadership. A week later, Daniel appeared via video call, thinner but composed. His presence silenced the room. "Reed Industries will cooperate with every investigation," he said. "But I'm still CEO until proven guilty." His lawyer objected. The board muttered. But Daniel's charisma, the same force that built his empire, flickered back to life. Watching the broadcast from home, Sarah realized something terrifying. Daniel Reed was not finished. In the days that followed, Daniel turned the narrative on its head. He gave an exclusive interview from the hospital, framed as a man betrayed by someone close to him. He didn't name Sarah. He didn't need to. He played the role of the fallen hero with haunting precision. Clips of him saying, "Forgiveness is harder than revenge," went viral. Sympathy poured in. The world loved a comeback story, and Daniel knew exactly how to write his own. Sarah's phone buzzed non-stop, with messages, half sympathy, half hate. She had planned for many outcomes, but not this one. 3 weeks later, an invitation arrived, handwritten, elegant, unmistakably Daniel's. "Dinner, Friday 8 p.m., our place. We need to talk." Sarah read it over and over. Part of her wanted to throw it away. Another part needed closure. Friday night, she arrived at the penthouse for the first time since the heart attack. Everything looked the same. Spotless marble, golden light, expensive silence. Daniel was waiting at the dining table, a bandage still visible beneath his open collar. "Welcome home," he said softly. The dinner was quiet, almost too calm. They ate little, spoke less. Finally, Daniel set down his fork. "Do you remember what I told you when we got married?" She hesitated. "That we'd build a world together." He nodded. "We did, and we destroyed it too." A pause. Then he reached into his pocket and slid a folder across the table. "Inside are legal documents. I'm transferring you the beach house, your studio, and full control of the design company you started. You deserve that much." She frowned. "Why?" "Because I know what I did to you. Maybe this is how I fix it." For the first time, she saw something she hadn't in years. Guilt. Real, unguarded guilt. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to end the war. But part of her still wondered, was this another move in his game? 2 days later, Daniel's PR team launched a campaign called Rebuild. It painted him as a reformed man, committed to ethics, charity, and transparency. Interviews showed him visiting hospitals, talking about second chances. The same public that once called him corrupt now called him courageous. Meanwhile, Sarah's name continued to trend as the woman who nearly cost him everything. Even friends turned distant. Clients withdrew from her design business. The world that once admired her grace now whispered about her betrayal. Late one night, as Sarah sorted through paperwork from the beach house transfer, she noticed something odd, a missing signature page. The file looked complete, but when she checked the property records online, the deed hadn't been changed at all. Her phone rang. It was Alex. "Sarah, I've been digging. You won't like this." "What is it?" "I'm getting it. Daniel's been quietly buying back the media companies that ran the exposés. He's cleaning his name and erasing yours." Her pulse quickened. "He's rewriting the story." "Exactly. Soon there'll be no trace you were ever involved." Sarah sank into her chair. The man she thought she'd beaten had turned her own strategy against her. The next evening, Sarah went to Daniel's office. He looked up from his desk, calm as always. "You found out," he said. "You're erasing me," she replied. "All those files, all that truth, and now you'll walk away clean." Daniel folded his hands. "I told you, we're even. You took my empire, I took your reputation. Balance, Sarah." She stared at him, disbelief hardening into fury. "You planned this from the start." He leaned back. "Not the heart attack, not the fall, but after I woke up, yes. You taught me what revenge feels like. I simply learned faster." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Sarah whispered, "You can't keep rewriting the truth forever." Daniel smiled faintly. "Truth is just what people believe, and right now they believe me." That night, Sarah sat alone on the beach, the ocean whispering under a violet sky. The revenge she once dreamed of had come full circle, and somewhere in the middle she'd lost herself. She opened her phone, scrolled through news feeds filled with Daniel's redemption story, then opened her email draft folder. There, an unsent message waited, a full statement with evidence, timelines, recordings, the real truth. Her finger hovered over send. If she released it, Daniel would fall again, but so would she. She looked up at the horizon. The waves kept breaking, relentless and clean. For the first time, she felt the urge not to fight, but to walk away, to start over somewhere no one knew her name. With a trembling sigh, she deleted the draft. At sunrise, Daniel appeared on national television, smiling, charming, reborn. Somewhere across the coast, Sarah boarded a train, leaving Los Angeles behind. The camera of imagination would linger on both faces.
One rebuilt, one freed, each believing they had won. But as the narrator's voice would fade out, in the game of betrayal, no one truly wins. Some build empires out of lies, others burn theirs for the truth, but in the end, both lose a piece of their soul. The train rattled through the night, cutting across the sleeping countryside. Sarah sat by the window, watching city lights fade into distant specks. Her reflection looked different, tired, but lighter. She had left behind everything: the mansion, the press, the whispers. For the first time in years, there was silence. In her small leather bag were only the essentials: a few clothes, her passport, and a flash drive, the last piece of truth she hadn't destroyed. It contained evidence, evidence that could end Daniel Reed forever.
But she didn't open it. Not yet. The world outside blurred into darkness, and for once, Sarah let herself sleep, not as the millionaire's wife, not as the betrayer or the betrayed, just as herself. Weeks passed. Sarah found herself in a coastal town 3 hours away, quiet, artistic, anonymous. She rented a small apartment overlooking the harbor and started painting again. Her hands, once used to signing documents and hiding secrets, now moved freely across the canvas. Her art was raw, emotional, waves crashing, faces half hidden, fire meeting water. Local galleries took notice. Within a month, her name began to circulate, not as Sarah Reed, but S. Hartley, her maiden name. For the first time, she was seen for her talent, not her scandal. She told no one about Daniel. To them, she was just another woman rebuilding her life. But at night, when the sea roared outside her window, she'd still see his face. Calm, calculating, invincible. One rainy morning, Sarah stopped by a small cafe. The television behind the counter played muted news, but a familiar name caught her attention. She froze. The headline read, "Reed Industries launches $500 million charity fund. CEO Daniel Reed honored for philanthropy." The camera panned to him, smiling, surrounded by cameras. He looked stronger, younger almost, as if the heart attack had been nothing but a chapter he'd already rewritten. Then the host added something else. In a touching tribute, Reed named the foundation after his late wife, Sarah. Sarah nearly dropped her coffee. Late wife? The barista turned up the volume. The reporter continued. While Mrs. Reed's tragic passing was never confirmed publicly, sources close to the family suggest she was lost at sea following personal struggles last year. Sarah's heart raced. He had declared her dead. Her face gone from the world. Her name stolen and used as a memorial for his redemption. She wasn't just erased now. She was buried. Back in her apartment, Sarah tore through the internet. Every trace of her old identity had been replaced by memorial pages, press statements, and condolence messages. Daniel had rewritten the narrative completely. He was now the grieving husband, the reformed leader, the philanthropic millionaire. And she? A ghost, the tragic wife who inspired his change. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She opened the old flash drive and stared at the files. Recordings, receipts, emails, video footage. Everything she needed to bring him down. But to release them now, she'd have to reveal that she was alive, that she had faked her death, that she had run. She'd lose the fragile peace that she had built. She had a choice: stay hidden and free, or return and fight. That evening there was a knock on her door. Sarah froze. No one visited her. When she opened it, a young woman stood there, soaked from the rain, holding a folder. "Mrs. Reed?" she whispered. Sarah's heart stopped. "You must be mistaken." The woman shook her head. "No, I know who you are. I used to work for Daniel."
Sarah stepped back, wary. "What do you want?" The woman looked terrified. "He's not what you think. He's doing something huge. Offshore accounts, false charities. It's all fake. The foundation's a front. He's moving money again." Sarah's hands tightened on the doorframe. "He's laundering through his own redemption fund," she said softly. The woman nodded. "And he's using your name to make it look untouchable." The woman, who introduced herself as Lena, handed Sarah the folder. Inside were bank records, photographs, and internal memos, all signed by Daniel's executives. It was the missing piece. Sarah's pulse quickened. The web of deceit was bigger than before, smarter, cleaner, and all protected by the illusion of morality. Daniel had built a new empire, this time under the disguise of kindness, and he had done it using her name. That night, Sarah stared at the flash drive and Lena's folders side by side. Between them lay the truth, enough to destroy Daniel's new life. But exposure came with a price. To bring him down, she'd have to rise from the dead. The next morning, Sarah packed her bag again. The harbor wind cut cold across her face, but her mind was clear. She had run once. She wouldn't run again. Daniel Reed thought she was gone, and that was her greatest advantage. She contacted Alex, her old friend from the journalism network. His voice trembled when he heard her. "Sarah? My God, everyone thinks you're dead." "I need your help. One last time." He hesitated. "But if we do this, he'll come after you." She smiled faintly. "Let him. He already tried to bury me once." A week later, the world woke up to chaos. Every major news outlet flashed the same breaking headline. Sarah Reed, the wife who died, returns with explosive evidence. The video showed Sarah standing calmly beside Alex in a quiet studio. Her tone was controlled, her eyes fierce. "I am alive, and the truth Daniel Reed built his new empire on is a lie." She presented documents, recordings, and financial trails that traced millions of dollars in fraud. She showed proof that the charity fund was a front, a way to rebuild his power under the mask of virtue. The internet exploded. Some called her brave, others called her a manipulator, but the world couldn't look away. Daniel Reed's empire began to crack again, this time from the inside.
Daniel didn't stay silent. Within hours, his legal team launched a full-scale defense. He appeared on live TV, calm as ever, calling Sarah's return a tragic misunderstanding. He claimed she suffered from mental distress and fabricated the story for attention. He even presented falsified psychiatric records. It was a masterstroke. Cruel, but genius. The public was divided. Sarah fought back with truth, but Daniel fought with perception, and perception always moved faster. Still, deep down he knew, this time she had something he couldn't erase. 2 nights later, Sarah received a message. "Meet me. One last time. No cameras, no lawyers." She went. The meeting place was the old penthouse, dimly lit, quiet, haunted by memories. Daniel stood by the window, glass of whiskey in hand. When he turned, his expression wasn't anger. It was exhaustion. You win. Or maybe we both lose. Sarah stepped closer. You used me. You used my death. He sighed. I use the only thing people care about. Tragedy. You think the world listens to truth? They only listen to pain. Then maybe it's time they felt yours. He chuckled bitterly. Do what you have to do. I'm tired of fighting ghosts. She looked at him. This man she had once loved, hated, destroyed, and mourned. And for a fleeting second, she saw the same pain reflected in his eyes. Without another word, she left. The door closed behind her. Quietly. Finally. The next morning, every network replayed footage of Daniel being escorted into custody. Fraud. Embezzlement. False charity operations. It was over. The empire had fallen. Again. But this time, there was no satisfaction. No victory. Just silence. Sarah watched from a distance, her hair loose in the morning wind. The world would never know the full story. Not the love, not the betrayal, not the slow erosion of two hearts that once beat for each other. But she knew, and maybe that was enough. Weeks later, she walked through an art gallery. On the wall hung her newest painting. Two silhouettes, standing apart, but bound by a faint line of gold between them. The title? Echoes of Revenge. As she walked away, her narration, soft, reflective, would fade into the cinematic outro. Love and revenge are born from the same fire. One burns to protect, the other to destroy. And when the smoke clears, only truth remains. The city had changed. Headlines screamed Daniel Reed's downfall, yet the buzz around Sarah was more complex. Some hailed her as a hero, a woman who exposed corruption at the highest levels. Others whispered darkly, calling her manipulative, dangerous, and ruthless. Sarah walked through the streets of her small town, now fully anonymous, but not invisible. Her presence was felt in whispers and glances. Freedom, she realized, came with a cost. Her apartment was quiet, the soft hum of the harbor waves outside filling the room. Sarah sat at her desk, staring at the flash drive that had destroyed Daniel's empire. It should have felt victorious. It didn't. She had rebuilt her life from nothing, gained independence, and seen justice served. But in the quiet moments, she felt a hollow ache, the remnants of the love she had once had, and the shadow of the woman she had become. She wondered, had she crossed the line? Did revenge justify itself when it cost a part of her soul? Weeks later, Sarah held her first solo art gallery exhibition under the name S. Hartley. The walls were adorned with her work, abstract yet emotionally raw, faces half hidden, waves colliding, lines of gold threading through darkness. Collectors and critics were impressed. People admired the art, but none recognized the story behind the hands that painted it. To them, she was a rising star. To herself, she was a woman who had survived betrayal, orchestrated revenge, and lost pieces of her heart in the process. The exhibition drew crowds, yet her mind often wandered to Daniel, the man who had once been everything. One evening, her phone buzzed with an encrypted message. You've done what you set out to do, but some debts remain unpaid. Dr. She froze. Daniel's handwriting was unmistakable. A cold thrill ran through her. Even after all this, he wasn't done. Her fingers hovered over the phone. Should she reply, confront, or ignore? She chose to wait. Days passed. Shadows lingered. Sarah noticed people from her past life, reporters, old friends, even former business associates starting to appear in her small town. She was no longer a ghost. Her past had followed her, carried by curiosity, whispers, and fear. The freedom she sought was now complicated. Her identity, once a weapon, had become a target. Even in her isolation, she felt the pull of the city, the empire, and Daniel. Late one afternoon, a familiar figure appeared at the gallery's back door. "Alex," she said, voice low, eyes scanning the empty room. "He's alive. And he's moving again, bigger than before. You thought this was over, but it's not." Sarah's heart tightened. "Then I'll stop him." Again. Alex hesitated. "Are you sure you want to go back?" "Yes," she said firmly. "But this time, it's not about revenge. It's about ending it, once and for all." Over the next week, Sarah and Alex worked in secrecy. They tracked Daniel's movements through financial filings, subtle social media posts, and insider information from Lena, the whistleblower who had first alerted Sarah to his offshore dealings. The pieces were coming together. Unlike the last time, Sarah's plan was not fueled by emotion alone, but it was precise, calculated, and ethically justified. Her goal exposed Daniel's last manipulation while protecting herself and the people who could be hurt by the fallout. Sarah reflected on what she had learned from her revenge against Daniel. Revenge, she realized, was a double-edged sword. It gave her power, but it left scars invisible to the world. She had rebuilt her life once, and she had the tools to do it again. But she also knew the psychological toll was immense. Every move she made now required patience, restraint, and moral clarity. It was a rainy evening when Sarah got word that Daniel would be attending a charity gala in Los Angeles, the same city where it had all begun. She stood by the window of her apartment, rain hitting the glass, thinking, "This is the moment. One last confrontation. No games, no masks, just truth." Her pulse quickened, and for the first time in months, she felt the familiar adrenaline that came with facing Daniel Reed, the man she once loved, hated, and outwitted. Sarah arrived at the gala disguised as a donor. Elegant, confident, anonymous. Inside, Daniel moved through the crowd with ease, smiling, charming, and completely unaware she was here. For a moment, she observed him. He was the same man who had underestimated her once, but now she was prepared. She held the power of truth in her hands. Tonight, everything would change. One last revelation, one last reckoning. Sarah approached Daniel's security perimeter and slipped Alex's contact into his path, making sure key documents were leaked to investigative journalists in real time. Daniel's expression faltered, only slightly, as he noticed the first hints of exposure. He knew her style. He had underestimated her once, but this time the battle wasn't about money. It was about truth, reputation, and justice. Sarah watched quietly, calm, knowing that patience and precision would finally tip the scales in her favor. The gala continued around them. Laughter, music, champagne glasses clinking. But beneath the glittering lights, a quiet storm was brewing. Sarah had achieved freedom before, but the price of that freedom had never been clearer. And as Daniel glanced toward her across the room, she smiled faintly, calm, steady, and unshakable. The game isn't over, she thought. It's just reaching the final move.
The city lights of Los Angeles shimmered against the night sky, reflecting off glass towers that held the stories of countless ambitions and countless betrayals. Sarah stood in the shadows of the gala hall, watching the crowd of elites laugh, toast, and celebrate. She adjusted her evening gown, took a deep breath, and reminded herself why she had returned. This was more than revenge. It was justice. Daniel Reed moved through the crowd like a king among subjects, confident, charming, untouchable. But tonight, he was about to realize that his empire, his influence, and his carefully crafted image were all built on fragile lies. Sarah signaled Alex, who had positioned himself near the media control room. "Once I get his attention, release everything," she whispered. Alex nodded. His hands hovered over the keyboard, ready to send files to the major outlets. Sarah's eyes scanned the gala floor. Daniel laughed with dignitaries, unaware that the very people applauding him would soon witness the cracks in his empire. Her pulse raced, not with fear, but focus. This was the culmination of months of planning, investigation, and quiet observation. Every move Daniel had made had left traces. She had found them, followed them, and was now ready to expose him to the world. She approached Daniel slowly, every step deliberate. He turned, and for a moment, surprise flickered across his face. "Sarah," he said, voice calm but cautious, "you're here." "I never left," she replied softly, eyes locked on his. The music and chatter faded in her mind. It was just the two of them. For years they had danced around lies, power, and betrayal. Tonight, it would end. "Why now?" Daniel asked. "You had your freedom." "Freedom isn't enough. Justice is." At her subtle signal, Alex began uploading the files to news outlets, social media platforms, and investigative journalists simultaneously. Daniel's confident mask faltered as he glanced around. Screens across the gala lit up with headlines. "Reed Industries exposed, offshore accounts, charity fraud, and corporate lies." "Sarah Reed reveals the true story behind the tycoon's empire." Gasps and murmurs spread through the crowd. Cameras flashed. People pulled out their phones, capturing every reaction. Daniel's composure slipped, just slightly. He realized the truth wasn't just in the files, it was in the public eye, where perception mattered more than power. Daniel, ever the strategist, quickly regained his composure. He moved to the podium, lifting a hand to quiet the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice smooth, "I know there are accusations circulating tonight." He smiled. "But let us remember, not everything is as they seem." Some applauded, uncertain. Others murmured in skepticism. Sarah watched, expression unreadable, as he tried to frame the narrative once more. But this time, Sarah had prepared for him. Every statement he made could be countered with evidence, undeniable proof of wrongdoing. The gala erupted into chaos as Alex displayed documents and video evidence in real time. Journalists scrambled to verify, cameras zoomed in, and the elite attendees whispered, shocked. Daniel's attempts to control perception failed. For the first time, his charm could not mask the truth. The room, once filled with admiration for him, now buzzed with questions, doubt, and incredulity. Sarah stood tall, her eyes fixed on Daniel. She was no longer the victim. She was the orchestrator of truth. Finally, Sarah stepped closer to Daniel, her voice calm but unwavering. "Do you remember what you taught me?" she asked. "About power, about control, about hiding behind charm and money."
He looked at her, tension building. "I remember," he said cautiously. "You used people," she said, eyes blazing. "You manipulated, lied, and thought no one would see. But the world is watching now, and I made sure they do." He swallowed hard, realizing that for once he could not spin the story. The final blow came when Alex presented evidence of Daniel's personal manipulations, proving he had used charity fronts, false narratives, and even falsified legal documents to maintain his power. The media recorded every word, and the footage instantly went viral. Daniel's empire, carefully rebuilt after his heart attack, began to crumble again in the public eye. Legal authorities were notified, investors pulled out, and sponsors severed ties. For the first time, Daniel Reed was powerless in the world he had once dominated. Sarah finally allowed herself to breathe. The years of fear, anger, and betrayal, all the planning, waiting, and watching, culminated in this moment. She didn't feel triumph. She didn't feel revenge. She felt relief. The man who had once manipulated and hurt her was exposed. The world knew the truth, and she could walk away, truly free this time. The gala ended in chaos. Police escorted Daniel's executives, journalists followed, and the whispers of scandal filled the night. Sarah walked out into the city streets, the cool night air filling her lungs. She felt lighter, unburdened, finally untethered from the past. The skyline glimmered, reminding her of all the battles fought, all the scars earned, and the freedom gained. Standing alone atop a city overlook, Sarah reflected on the journey. The love she had lost, the betrayal she had endured, the revenge she had executed, the freedom she had earned. She realized that the true cost of power and revenge wasn't in victory or money. It was in the emotional toll, the sleepless nights, the trust broken, and the soul tested. Yet despite the pain, she felt stronger than ever. She had survived, outsmarted, and reclaimed her life. As dawn broke over Los Angeles, Sarah's silhouette stood against the rising sun. Behind her, chaos. Ahead of her, possibilities. Some wars are fought with fists, others with words. I chose mine wisely, she whispered. And now, I am free.
The camera of imagination would fade out on her resolute figure, a woman who had walked through betrayal, revenge, and danger, and emerged alive, unbroken, and victorious. The sun rose slowly over the coastal town, its light spilling across the harbor in shades of gold and rose. Sarah stood at her apartment balcony, holding a cup of coffee, feeling the gentle breeze brush her face. It was peaceful, almost unreal after months of chaos, betrayal, and revenge. For the first time, she didn't have to look over her shoulder. Her life was hers to shape. No headlines, no manipulations, no empire to destroy. Sarah had devoted herself fully to her art. Her paintings were no longer just expressions of pain or revenge. They were reflections of healing, growth, and hope. She spent hours each day in her studio, experimenting with color, texture, and light. Her first gallery after Daniel's fall was a tentative step. Now she felt confident, her hands steady, her vision clear. Collectors and critics began to notice her consistently, not just for the story of her past, but for the talent she possessed. The fame felt different now, earned, not forced, not tied to scandal. One afternoon, as Sarah worked on a new series of canvases, there was a knock at the door. It was Lena, the whistleblower who had once helped Sarah uncover Daniel's schemes. "I thought you might need help," Lena said. "After everything, you deserve someone you can trust." Sarah smiled faintly. "I've learned to stand on my own." Lena nodded. "I know, but even the strongest need allies sometimes." The two women shared a quiet moment, a bond forged in fire and truth. That evening, Sarah opened a box of letters and old photographs she had kept from before the chaos. Images of her life with Daniel, the love, the laughter, the moments before greed had tainted everything, stirred a storm of emotions. She traced a finger over one photograph, a smile, a hand held, a promise of forever. It was painful to remember. It was also healing. She realized that rebuilding didn't mean erasing the past. It meant accepting it, learning from it, and moving forward stronger. In the weeks that followed, she faced an internal struggle. Anger still lingered, as did the desire for final revenge. She visited the courthouse where Daniel's case was being processed remotely. Watching the legal machinery move forward without her direct intervention, she realized something profound. Revenge had served its purpose. Daniel had lost power, public trust, and control. Now it was time for her to reclaim herself fully. Forgiveness, not for him, but for herself, became the key. Not forgetting, not excusing, but releasing the hold of hatred and fear. Sarah began reconnecting with her old passions and hobbies outside art. She joined a local sailing club where the rhythm of the waves mirrored her desire for freedom. She volunteered at community programs, using her influence to uplift rather than manipulate. Every action, small or significant, reminded her that life was bigger than power, money, and revenge. The freedom she had longed for was no longer about leaving Daniel behind. It was about rediscovering herself. One morning, an envelope arrived, unsigned. Inside was a simple message. "I've accepted the consequences. I hope you find peace. Dr." Sarah stared at the note. Daniel's handwriting was unmistakable. For a moment she felt the old anger flare. Then she exhaled. The emotions no longer controlled her. She placed the note in a drawer. Symbolic closure. No retaliation. No reply. Just acceptance. Months later, Sarah hosted a new gallery exhibit. This time it was not about scandal or headlines. It was about her life, her journey, and her art. Visitors admired her work, unaware of the full story behind the hands that created it. To Sarah, it didn't matter. She no longer needed validation. She had built her life on her own terms. That evening, she stood on the balcony, looking at the city lights reflecting off the harbor. The world was vast, full of possibilities she had never explored before. Sarah's thoughts often returned to Daniel, not with hatred, not with longing, but with clarity. He had been a chapter in her life, a teacher of lessons, a mirror to her resilience, and a symbol of betrayal. And yet she had survived. She had emerged stronger, wiser, and freer. The past would always be a part of her, but it no longer defined her. Sarah began mentoring young women in business and the arts, sharing lessons of courage, resilience, and strategy. She spoke about navigating betrayal, the importance of ethical strength, and how to reclaim one's life when circumstances seem insurmountable.
She became a symbol not of revenge, but of empowerment, a living reminder that even after the deepest pain, one could rebuild and thrive. One evening, as the sun set in a brilliant display of oranges and purples, Sarah stood at the harbor once more. She thought of the journey, the love lost, the betrayals endured, the battles fought, and the victories won. Every scar had a story, every victory had a price. And yet she smiled. Freedom isn't just leaving the past behind, she whispered. It's carrying it with grace, strength, and courage, and choosing who you become next. The camera of imagination would fade out on Sarah's silhouette, framed by the golden light of sunset. A new chapter had begun, one without fear, without revenge, and without shadows. The echoes of her past would remain, but they no longer controlled her. She had rebuilt her life, her identity, and her peace.
The first light of dawn painted the sky in soft hues of gold and pink. Sarah walked along the harbor, barefoot on the sand, feeling the cool water lap at her feet. The waves whispered stories of endings and beginnings, carrying the past away while promising the future. She inhaled deeply, savoring the air, the quiet, and the sensation of control she had earned. This was her life now. No headlines, no betrayals, no shadows of a man who had once dominated her world. Sarah had opened a new art studio, light-filled, airy, and full of possibility. It was more than a workspace. It was a sanctuary, a place where imagination could flourish without fear. She spent hours experimenting with colors, textures, and forms, each brushstroke carrying the freedom she had fought for. Her work had evolved. It was no longer only emotional expression, but a celebration of survival, resilience, and hope. Students, young artists, and visitors often came to her studio, seeking inspiration, guidance, or simply a moment of calm in a chaotic world. Sarah began mentoring aspiring artists and entrepreneurs, emphasizing integrity, courage, and creativity. She told them, "Life will test you, people will betray you, but your strength, your vision, and your choices define you, not anyone else's actions." Her story inspired others, but she no longer sought validation. Teaching, guiding, and empowering became her legacy, a life built on her terms rather than the shadows of someone else's empire. One evening, Sarah received an invitation to a prestigious international art exhibition. The exhibition celebrated resilience, rebirth, and the power of human creativity. For the first time, she would share her story, not as a headline, but through her art, a reflection of the life she had reclaimed. She prepared for the showcase meticulously, selecting pieces that told the silent narrative of survival, betrayal, and renewal. The opening night arrived. The gallery was packed with critics, artists, and patrons from around the world. Her paintings drew people in, the depth, emotion, and story behind each stroke palpable, without a single word. At the center of the gallery hung her masterpiece, a vast canvas of a stormy sea with a single golden light breaking through the waves. Visitors paused in awe. Whispers spread. Who is she? The depth, the soul in her work. Sarah stood quietly in the corner, watching. She no longer needed recognition. She was content in knowing her truth, her journey, and her triumph.
As the night wound down, a courier handed her an envelope. Inside was a simple note. "I've finally understood. Thank you for showing me strength. Dr." Sarah smiled faintly. Daniel's words were not an apology, not a request, but a recognition, a subtle acknowledgement that she had survived, prevailed, and outgrown him. It was the closure she hadn't known she needed. The days following the exhibition were filled with opportunities, growth, and new friendships. Sarah explored travel, studied different art forms, and learned to live fully, not haunted by the past, but enriched by it. She revisited her old coastal hideaways, walked along familiar beaches, and painted with the freedom that only someone who has truly fought for it can feel. Every brushstroke, every step, every moment was hers, entirely, uncompromisingly hers. One afternoon, Sarah returned to the cliff where she had once reflected on her revenge and freedom. She stood there, holding a small box containing mementos of her past life, photographs, letters, and keepsakes of the storm she had survived. With a deep breath, she released them into the ocean. The waves carried them away, and with them the remnants of anger, fear, and obsession. As she watched the tide pull them out of sight, she whispered, "I am free, I am whole, and my future is unwritten." Sarah's art flourished in new ways, combining her emotional depth with technical mastery. Critics lauded her work for its authenticity, depth, and resilience. Collectors worldwide sought her pieces, but Sarah cared more about the message her work conveyed than the money it brought. Through her art, she communicated stories of struggle, redemption, and empowerment, inspiring countless others to reclaim their lives. Sarah spent mornings walking along the beach, afternoons in her studio, and evenings teaching young artists or mentoring ambitious women. Her life was a balance of creativity, peace, and purposeful action. The past was acknowledged, the present fully embraced, and the future open to endless possibility. The freedom she had fought for had become a reality she nurtured daily. One quiet night, she stood at the edge of the harbor, looking at the lights reflecting on the water. She thought about Daniel, not with anger, not with longing, but with understanding. He had been a teacher in his own way, showing her the consequences of betrayal, the power of resilience, and the importance of self-worth. She had survived, she had reclaimed her life, and in that moment she finally felt complete. "The past shapes us, but it doesn't define us," she whispered. "I am the author of my story now." The camera of imagination would slowly pull back, capturing Sarah's silhouette framed against the glittering harbor under a full moon. A new chapter awaited, unwritten and limitless. Life is not about the battles we fight for others. It's about winning the one within ourselves. And I have won.